Hey guys, it's Chad, CEO of Above Ground Pros and founder of Easy Pool Academy. With over a quarter-century experience in the above ground business, I help above ground owners like yourself manage your pool easily, perfectly, and as cost effectively as possible. In this video, we're going to talk about the chlorine alternatives. You know, chlorine alternatives have been huge. 27 years ago when I got in this business, we had chlorine alternatives out there. And everybody's wanting to get away from the harsh effects of chlorine in the water, so they want to go with some alternatives. In this video, we're going to discuss salt systems, ionizers, and ozone generators. You know, something I've learned is the normal above ground consumer, it's hard to find real information on these products because what you're doing is you're going out and everybody's revving up the product that they're selling. Well, I've got nothing to sell you, so I'm going to tell you what you really need to know on each one of these products, what they do, how they work, the advantages and the disadvantages, and what it's going to be like maintaining your pool with these products. And then you can make the decision on which one works best for you. But I want to start by saying this. The biggest misconception with these chlorine alternatives, the salt system, the ionizer, and the ozone generator, is that you are going to have a swimming pool with no chlorine in it. And that is not true for any of these systems. For any of these systems, you're still going to have chlorine in the water. But I want to take a second and talk to you about that. I'll put it this way, you have more chlorine in your drinking water than you're going to have with any one of these systems. You know, if you just filled your pool up out of city or county water and hopped in it, you're going to have more chlorine in that water than you're going to use with a chlorine alternative. So every one of these alternatives are going to greatly decrease the amount of chlorine that you have in the pool, but you still need chlorine, okay? You still have to have that oxidizing agent in the water, killing bacteria, doing what it's got to do. Okay, so none of these alternatives are 100% free of chlorine. You just lower your chlorine tremendously. But let's go a little deeper with that. Chances are chlorine is not causing the problems that you're wanting to get away from. You know, chlorine over the years has got a real bad reputation. And let me tell you something, chlorine is probably not what you're wanting to get away from. What you're wanting to get away from is what we call chloramines. Chloramines is what's causing the smell of chlorine around the pool. It's what's causing the eye irritation, the skin irritation. That's what people are really wanting to get rid of. Not the chlorine, but the chloramines. Let me explain to you quick what chloramines are. When you put chlorine in the water, let's say you were just using normal chlorine in your pool. You put chlorine in your water. When that chlorine hits the water, it breaks down into two substances. One substance is killing stuff and then gone real quick. The other substance stays in the water and it kills over time. Well, as it's doing that, over a period of a week, that chlorine that's killing things starts mixing with other contamination in the water. And it starts producing what we call a chloramine. It starts mixing with ammonias in the water, and it becomes an inactive chlorine. It's chlorine in the water, but it's not doing anything. It's not killing anything. That's what we call a chloramine. Then that chloramine starts producing the chlorine smell around the pool. You know, just the free chlorine isn't going to produce smell around your pool unless you have a tremendous amount of it in there. You know, it's the chloramines that you're smelling. It's the chloramines that are burning your eyes. It's the chloramines that are irritating your skin. So the bottom line is when we talk about chlorine alternatives, it's not so much that people are wanting to get away from the chlorine. Now, don't get me wrong. Some people have particular, skin issues and fair skin, and the chlorine is an issue. And I've I've got those customers, don't get me wrong. But 95% of us, we're not trying to get away from the chlorine. We're trying to get away from the chloramines. And chloramines are produced by abusing your chlorine, by not maintaining your pool properly. The bottom line is if you're doing things the way you're supposed to do them, you're keeping chloramines out of your water anyhow. okay? And we teach all this stuff at Easy Pool Academy. We've got a free training, for you there. Feel free to sign up for that and check us out at Easy Pool Academy. We'll teach all that stuff there, okay? But the bottom line is that's what we're trying to get away from with these chlorine alternatives. Not so much the chlorine in our water, but the chloramines that are produced by using chlorine. And these chloramines can stay out of the water if we know what we're doing, if we're maintaining our pool properly, if we're staying on top of it and we're doing things the right way. We're not abusing things, we're not letting things get out of control. That's what we're getting away from. So I wanted to start by saying that because chlorine's really got a bad reputation over years, and it's not the chlorine that's so bad. It's the effects of improper use of the chlorine. And again, we teach all this at Easy Pool Academy. Check us out. We'll talk about that there, okay? So in this video, I want to go over the different chlorine alternatives that they have out there and give you the information you need to know to make the decision that you need to make to decide which one might be best for you. So let's get started here. The first one we're going to go over are salt systems. Now, let me start first with salt systems on how they work. Number one, this is what you do. The required amount of salt that you need, you throw it in your pool, you run your pump all night, all day, 24 hours, and let all that salt dissolve. So the required amount of salt is placed in the pool's water and it's dissolved. Now, the first question people usually have on this is it going to feel like swimming in the ocean? No. It's about a 1/16 less of the chlorine in the ocean. It's a quarter of the amount of salt that comes out of your tears. So the bottom line is no, your salt level is going to be so low, it's not going to be like swimming in the ocean. You're not even going to know what's in there. That's usually people's first thought about the salt system, is it's going to be like swimming in the ocean. No, that's not the case. As the salted water runs through the salt cell, you connect your salt cell to your swimming pool, a low voltage direct current initiates electrolysis. Now, if you want to get deeper into what electrolysis is, I'll let you Google that once this video is over. We're going to kind of skip some of the real details and get to the meat of what I believe you really need to know. The electrolysis converts the salt into two things, into hydrogen gas and hypochlorous acid. Hypochlorous acid is the exact same ingredient that is produced by using powdered chlorine in the water. Here's the first misconception of a salt system. People think that you're using salt to clean the water. No, you're not. You're producing chlorine with a salt system. The way a salt system works is it produces hypochlorous acid, which is the same ingredient that chlorine produces. Okay, so you're producing chlorine. The salt is not doing anything for your water bacteria-wise or cleaning-wise. It's converting that salt into chlorine. So you're still using chlorine in a salt system. That's the biggest misconception with the salt system, is you're using salt. No, you're not. You're using salt to produce the chlorine. So the hypochlorous acid is the same active ingredients that's produced when you put powder chlorine in the pool. The hydrogen gas that it makes basically just floats out of the water and is gone. It escapes the pool in form of bubbles. The hypochlorous acid sanitizes the water and eventually reverts back into salt, and the process repeats. To some extent, it reverts back into salt. Now, what's going to happen is over time, you're going to have to, you're going to eat up your salt, turning it into chlorine. You're going to have to put some more salt in the pool at some point, but that usually takes a while. We'll talk about that in a second. But that's how a salt system works. You throw your salt in, it dissolves. As that salted water runs through the cell turns it into chlorine. The chlorine kills its stuff, then it's gone, turns back into salt, what's left in there, and the process continues. That's how a salt system works. These are the advantages of a salt system. Number one, you're producing a very low chlorine content in the pool. Normally 0.5 to 1 parts per million, which is about 80% less than your average chlorine user. Somebody that's only using chlorine, with a salt system, you're producing 80% less chlorine than the normal chlorine user. So that's a real nice advantage. You know, you still got 25% or 20% of chlorine in the water that you're using, but it's extremely low. And this is what's taken away a lot of the harsh effects of chlorine. The hypochlorous acid that the salt produces has a very neutral pH, so it prevents rapid pH fluctuation. What I mean by this is you got to keep your pH around 7.2, 7.6. That's about the pH level that the hypochlorous acid is. So what's nice about that is it's producing a chemical that's the same pH as what your pool's supposed to be, so your pH stays stable. You know, there's some chlorines out there that you put in your water that have a pH of like 2.5. So every time you put this chlorine in there, you're lowering your pH, and then you're having to test your pH and bring your pH back up. So the nice thing about a salt system is it's not going to cause this rapid fluctuation in pH. Your pH is pretty much going to stay good all the time, and that's a nice plus to it. Now, another advantage is it's preventing the buildup of chloramines. And remember, chloramines is what we're wanting to get rid of. That's why we're probably going to all these chlorine alternatives, from the effects of chloramines. A salt system prevents the buildups of these chloramines, which is the chemical that irritates the skin and gives the pool that chlorine smell. Another advantage is the pool can be set on autopilot. Now, what I mean by that is, and we're going to go over in a second exactly how you use your system. But with the salt system, you basically throw your salt in, you set your dial, and you walk away and you're done. And it's doing its thing. So as far as chlorine, as far as putting sanitizer in your pool, you're pretty much done. The system runs on autopilot. It does its own thing, and it takes that away from having to mess with. You know, that's one of, you know, the salt system came out to be an alternative to chlorine, lower your chlorine use, make your water more healthy, yada, yada. But what's become a real big plus for the salt system is it's so maintenance free. It's so easy to, you know, maintain your pool because it's doing it itself. You don't have to do it. And that's become a real big selling point for the salt system, is it makes your chemical life much, much easier. So that's what I mean by the pool can be set on autopilot. Salt is very inexpensive. I mean, at the time of this video, a 40-pound bag of salt's about $5, and you might put in a bag once a month. So you're talking $5 a month in chemical maintenance. It's really, really inexpensive to maintain throughout the season as far as your salt's concerned. Another advantage is, because of the salted water, your water has a silky smooth feel. I really do like the feeling inside the pool of a salt system pool. That really is a nice advantage. It's really soft and clean and silky, and it makes for a real nice swimming experience. So those are your main advantages here with the salt system. Let's go over some of the disadvantages. A salt system has a high initial cost for the salt system itself, and then it has a high cell replacement cost. What I mean by that is you got to buy the salt system from the start. You might spend $600 to $900 on just the salt system. And then every 3, 4, 5 years, you got to replace the cell, which is going to cost you $300 to $400. So the give and take on it is, on a month-to-month basis, you're only spending a couple bucks in salt, but you got to buy, you're putting a lot of money in it at the beginning, and then every few years you're having to buy the salt cell, and that's going to be $300 or $400. So ultimately, over a 10-year period, it's still going to be lower than what you're spending in chlorine. It's still going to save you some money in chlorine. But a big thing with the salt system is people say, well, it's so much less expensive. Yes, it is less expensive, but you're spending your money different. You're not spending a lot through the year, but you have to put a lot in at the beginning, and every so many years you got to put $300 or $400 into a cell. Another disadvantage, and this is a huge disadvantage, salt will corrode and deteriorate the pool steel components. Years ago, probably 10 years ago, when the salt system really started coming out, The above ground business really wasn't ready for it. And people bought these salt systems and they put them on all steel pools. Well, steel and salt don't mix. I mean, you ask any saltwater fisherman, you know, they paint their boat once every couple months to protect it from the salt water. Salt and steel doesn't mix. It's going to corrode your pool. And there was about a 5 or 6 year period in the above ground business that I call the nightmare age, where everybody was putting salt systems on all steel pools, and then 4, 5, 6 years down the road, their pool had deteriorated because the salt system the salted water had eaten the pool up. So you have to put this on a pool designed for salt. That's your next disadvantage. It is best to have a pool designed for salt use. You know, I'm going to just go ahead and say this. If you have an all steel pool, do not put a salt system on it. If all the components of your pool are steel and you put a salt system on it, you're going to kill your pool in about 4 to 6 years is what I've seen on average, okay? Don't do it. So a lot of times it's best with a salt system to get it at the start when you first buy your pool. You know, then you can buy a pool designed for salt, put salt on it, and you'll be good to go. And basically how they do that is they make the entire pool out of a resin material, which isn't going to corrode, isn't going to deteriorate. The salt's going to have no effect on it. So that's kind of how you want to do it. You have to make sure with all the great advantages of a salt system, all those advantages have to be done on the right pool. You have to have a pool for it. We have videos on YouTube of how to determine that, yada, yada. You can check all that stuff out. But you got to have the right pool for it, okay? So make sure first you do. That's why a lot of times people start off there, you know, when they're first buying their pool, they get a pool designed for it and then a salt system works good. If you have a pool already and you're wanting to put a salt system on it, you need to make sure that it's designed for salt, that you can do that. And really, at the time of this video, salt system pools have only been out for about 5 or 6 years. So if your pool's 10 years old, chances are you put a salt system on it, you're going to kill it in 4, 5, 6 years. So that's what you need to know about a salt system. I wanted to go over that kind of stuff with you. So let's talk about using and maintaining a salt system. You know, what are you going to be doing when you get a salt system? Well, first of all, like we talked earlier, the initial amount of salt that your size pool needs, you throw it in the water, you let your pump run for 24 hours, 36 hours, you dissolve all that salt, then you're ready to go. The amount of chlorine that you want your salt system to produce per day is set on a dial on the salt generator. So your salt generator is going to have a dial that basically says, how much chlorine do you want to make? Well, that's all going to depend on your situation, your size pool, you know, how hot it is in the summer, how cool it is. You know, long story short, you pretty much set that dial and you're good with it. You might tweak it out when it gets real hot in the summer or you're using the pool. You might produce a little bit more. Again, we go over this stuff in Easy Pool Academy, but this is basically the gist of what you're going to be doing. The salt cell needs to be removed and cleaned every 3 months to prevent deposits from building up on the salt's plates. Or the cell's plates. Basically inside this cell are a bunch of plates that basically turns the salt into chlorine. It's going to leave little deposits on these plates. As it leaves deposits on the plates, these little white chalky deposits. As it does this, it's going to start losing its effectiveness. So you need to take that cell off every 3 months, hose it out with your garden hose, put it back on, you're back in business. It's easy, but it's just something you got to do with the salt system. Then the cell itself is normally going to need to be replaced roughly every 3 or 4 years. Some people are getting 5 years out of them, but on normal, about every 3 or 4 years, you're going to have to replace that cell. It's going to get to a point that it's no longer going to be effective in producing chlorine, and you're going to have to replace that cell. So that's basically what you're doing with the salt system. Now, no additional use of chlorine should be needed. You shouldn't have to be throwing in any more chlorine in your water with the salt system, aside of opening and closing the pool. This is how I do it. This is my opinion on it. A salt system is fabulous at maintaining an extremely low amount of chlorine in your water. What it's not good at is raising your chlorine level really, really quickly. So normally when we open pools, for the season, we want to go from 0 to where it needs to be real quick. So we'll put powder chlorine in there to raise it up, then the salt system maintains it. Same thing with closing the pool in the winter. You're about to close your pool up for the winter. You want to raise your chlorine level real quick, so all that chlorine's in the water through the winter. Normally the salt system isn't going to be great at raising it that quick. We put some chlorine in there. So really, on a salt system, the only time you should actually have to put chlorine in your water, granular chlorine in your water, is normally at the beginning of the season to get it going and at the end of season to close it down. Aside of that, you shouldn't have to put any chlorine in your water throughout the season. Your salt system's producing that, okay? So that's what I believe you really need to know to make your decision on a salt system. So let's talk about ionizers. This is our second chlorine alternative. Let's talk about how an ionizer works. What an ionizer is going to do, you're going to connect it to your system. The pool's ionizer uses a very low voltage DC current to discharge silver and copper ions into the pool's water. Basically, the ionizer has electrodes in it that are going to put silver and copper into your water. The ions bond, these silver and copper ions bond to the bacteria and the algae in the water, penetrating the cell's walls and killing them. Copper and silver are a very effective natural algae killer. Here's the deal. Copper and silver kill algae naturally. That's just what they do. Copper and silver in mountain streams, in lakes, it just kills bacteria. That's by nature what it's doing, what copper and silver does. So what you're basically doing is putting this copper and silver in your water to do what it naturally does, kill bacteria. By doing that, you don't need near as much chlorine in your water killing it because you have the minerals in your water that are naturally doing it. And that's basically how an ionizer works. The process reduces the amount of chlorine needed in the pool by up to 80%. Now here's the thing with an ionizer. It's lowering your chlorine level as much as a salt system is, but you still need chlorine in the water. An extremely less amount than you would normally. You've got a lot less chlorine in your water than you do in your tap water, but you still need chlorine. That's another misconception with these chlorine alternatives, is they're 100% chlorine free. No, they're not. You still have to use a little bit of chlorine. Why? Because chlorine is an extremely great oxidizer, and you got to have it in there for certain things. I'm about to share this with you. Now, here are the advantages of an ionizer. It's lowering your chlorine use by as much as 80%. You still got to go out there once a week on your normal routine. You still got to put chlorine in the water. You're putting 80% less chlorine in the water, but you still have to put chlorine in the water. So obviously the money spent on chlorine is reduced by up to 80%. So the other advantage is you're not putting near as much money in chlorine as somebody who's strictly using chlorine. Another advantage is there's very minuscule particles that are too small to be picked up by the filter, and they're enlarged by the ionizer. So the filter removes them from the water. Here's the deal. There's microscopic things in your pool, in your water, that basically, get sucked into your filter system, go through your filter back into the pool, get sucked in, go through your filter, go back in the pool. Now they're microscopic, so it's not, you're not really seeing it. It's not a big deal. You don't notice this. Well, the way an ionizer works is it's going to cause those real small particles to enlarge. As they enlarge, now they get caught in your filter and you clean them out. So that's kind of an advantage to it, is you're going to even get another higher level of filtration in your water with an ionizer. Now, it's going to reduce or eliminate the smell of chlorine around the pool, which is, the chloramines basically, and get those chloramines out of the water that are causing the harshness to your eyes and your skin. Why? Because you've only got 80 or 20% of the normal amount of chlorine. You have less chlorine in your water than you do in your drinking water, okay? That's why it's getting rid of your chlorine smell, those chloramines. Again, it's the chloramines that we're trying to get rid of here. It will not damage the pool's components. So what's nice about an ionizer is if you don't have a pool designed for salt use, you can put an ionizer on anything. With the salt system, you have to have a particular pool for it. With an ionizer, you can put it on any pool you want. So that's a big advantage for it. If you don't have a pool that can use salt, you can always go with an ionizer. Now let's talk about some of the disadvantages of an ionizer. Cloudy water is common from time to time with ionizers. Here's the concept. We just talked about the idea that the ionizer is going to cause those minuscule particles that you can't see, those microscopic particles, into bigger particles that are going to get picked up by your filter. Well, sometimes as this happens, because it's making those particles bigger, you're going to get momentary time spans where you're going to get momentary cloudy water until your filter picks it up, because it's making these microscopic particles a little bigger. You get a bunch of little bigger ones in there, and then you start to see the cloudiness in the water. Okay, so from time to time you're going to get these periodical shots of time where you're going to have cloudy water in the pool. It's not a big deal, but it's just something that kind of comes with it's a side effect, so to speak, of the ionizer. Copper levels should be monitored, or else the water in your pool will turn colored. Here's the idea. You're putting copper in your water. The copper is killing the bacteria, which is great. But what's going to happen is if you're not maintaining your copper levels, you're going to get too much copper in there, and now it's going to start turning your water an aqua greenish color. One more thing you're going to have to maintain with your swimming pool is your copper level. You're going to have to start paying attention to that. Normally nobody else has to really worry too much about their copper level unless you have some particular situation. You're on well water with a bunch of copper in it or whatnot. With an ionizer, you have to add in your maintenance you paying attention to your copper levels so that your copper levels don't get out of hand and then your pool starts turning an aqua greenish color. Now, if that happens, it's easy. You get some metal, you get some copper agent that you put in there, you get rid of it. It's not a big deal, but it's something that you got to add to your maintenance. So I consider that a bit of a disadvantage. Another disadvantage is the staining of the pool's liner can occur from the attaching ions of copper, which causes a green stain, or silver, which causes a black stain. pH levels need to be tested regularly to prevent staining. Long story short, I'm going to say it now and I'll probably say it again. Whatever these systems you go with, you still got to be testing your water. You still got to maintain your pH. You still got to pay attention to things, okay? And what will happen is if your pH is fluctuating and you're not paying attention to it, it's going to start causing green and black stains on your liner. Again, you can always come back with an agent and get rid of that, but it's something you're going to have to pay attention to so that it doesn't happen to you. Another disadvantage is ionizers do not neutralize, kill organic materials such as body oils, pollen, urine, etc. This is why you continue to maintain a low chlorine level. When you're swimming in the pool, your body oils, you get a bunch of little kids in there peeing in your pool. The ionizers, the copper and the silver, are not going to kill this stuff. So you still have to keep your chlorine level maintained to kill those things. The copper's killing a lot of the other bacteria, but not the organic materials that are in your pool. So that's why you got to continue to maintain a chlorine level, because that's what your chlorine level is going to be in there doing. Ionizers are not 100% chlorine free, which none of these systems are. Okay, again, that's a huge misconception with these chlorine alternatives. So those are your disadvantages with an ionizer. So let's talk about the using and maintaining an ionizer. What are you going to be doing, throughout your season if you get an ionizer? Well, first of all, your pH, your calcium hardness, and your copper should be routinely tested and maintained. You should be testing your pH and calcium on a week-to-week basis anyhow, But with an ionizer, you also got to add in coppers, and you got to test for that. You can get a test kit for it. It's not a big deal, but it's something you got to add to your regular maintenance that you're going to be doing with your ionizer. You're going to have to maintain a chlorine level of about 0.4, which is very low, very, very low. Again, this is way below drinking water chlorine, but you still got to keep some chlorine in the water. You got to remove the electrodes periodically for inspection and cleaning, normally about twice a season. Basically, the electrodes inside the ionizer, you got to pull them out, hose them off, put them back in. You probably want to do this twice a season. So it's an easy thing to do, but it's something you're going to have to do. You're going to replace the electrodes usually every 2 to 5 seasons, depending. You know, there's a real range of when you might need to do this. This is all going to depend on, you know, your size pool, the unit you buy, how much it's running it. You know, it all depends. But normally 2 to 5 years, you're going to want to replace the electrodes. And the electrodes aren't that expensive. It's not a real expensive thing. A couple $100 and you're back in business. So that's what I believe you really need to know about an ionizer to make the decision that you need to make. So now let's talk about ozone generators. This is something that's, I don't want to say a little newer. It is a bit newer to the above ground business. Still been out for years, and they've played around with these concepts for a long time, but they're really starting to get popular, and I want to go over what you need to know about the ozone generators themselves. So first of all, let's start here. How does this thing work? How does an ozone generator work? First of all, an ozone generator splits oxygen molecules in two, leaving single molecules to attach themselves with other oxygen molecules to become ozone, which is O3. Long story short, oxygen is O2. It splits up an oxygen. You have one oxygen here, one oxygen there. Another oxygen comes by, it attaches that single to the oxygen. Now it's O3, and now it's ozone. And it produces, you know, now it's not O2, it's O3. It's a different chemical. It's doing a different thing. But that's basically how it works. It's splitting oxygen molecules in the water and allowing those individual molecules to attach to other oxygen molecules to make ozone. Ozone is produced through the filter system and released into the piping of the pool's filter system. So one thing with an ozone that is a misconception is it's not putting ozone necessarily into your pool's water. It's putting ozone into your piping so that the water that moves through your piping is getting the benefits of the ozone. As the ozone combines with algae, oils, bacteria, it destroys them. You know, now what's different with an ozone generator as compared to an ionizer is ozone kills organic materials. It's going to kill the body fluids, the urine. It's going to kill those types of things in your water as well, where an ionizer would not. Ozone is produced as the pump runs. So that's basically how an ozone generator works. Your water goes through your filter system into the piping. As it's going back through the piping, it crosses the ozone generator. The ozone generator is producing ozone. The water goes back into the pool. Now here's another thing with ozone is it goes away very, very quickly. You know, even when they use ozone in the real world, away from swimming pools, they have to produce ozone on site. There's no such thing as taking ozone, putting it in a barrel, and then shipping it across the country where you can use it. It loses its effectiveness very, very quickly. So as it's putting it in your piping, it's putting it in the piping, and then as it gets into the pool, that ozone's gone. It's you know, it goes quick. So it kills it right there in the piping, and then it's gone. So let's talk about some of the advantages of the ozone generator. Ozone is a very powerful oxidizer, up to 100 times more than standalone chlorine. So ozone is extremely effective as an oxidizer with killing bacteria and the contamination inside your pool. It also reduces the need for chlorine use up to 80%, which is also what an ionizer is doing, which is also what a salt system is doing. But you still need a little bit of chlorine in your pool. You still have to put a little bit of chlorine in your pool. We're going to talk about that in a second. But it's reducing your chlorine up to 80%. Chlorine does not, or ozone generators do not corrode or deteriorate the pool's components. So another advantage of the ozone generators, you can put them on any pools you want. You don't need a special pool like you do with a salt system. So you can put them on whatever pool you have, you can use an ozone generator with. Another advantage is it prevents or reduces the chlorine smell around the pool or skin or eye irritation. Same thing as what we talked about in the other systems. You're not getting that chloramine buildup, which is what we're trying to get away from. It's not the chlorine we're trying to get away from, it's from the chloramines. And it's basically keeping your chlorine so low and producing ozone in such a regular basis that it's keeping those chloramines from building up in your pool, which is keeping you from smelling chlorine around the pool, and it's keeping those chloramines from irritating your eyes and irritating your skin. Ozone kills organic materials, such as body oils, pollen, urine, etc. So like we talked about in a second ago, you know, an ionizer is not going to do that. That's why you need some chlorine with an ionizer. An ozone generator will do that. Ozone does not fluctuate pH levels. This is very similar to a salt system. Ozone has a very neutral pH. It's already in the 7.2, 7.6 range. So your pH should maintain itself through the season very easily. You don't have to worry about your pH fluctuating all the time. So those are the good advantages of an ozone generator. Let's talk about some of the disadvantages. Now, this is number one. I want to talk to you about this. Ozone can be harmful in high doses. This seems to be the biggest fear with ozone generators. However, most manufacturers include safety devices to prevent harm. So keep this in mind. There's a lot of people out there. Does ozone hurt you? Yes. Is it going to hurt you with the system that manufacturers are making on a swimming pool? Look, they're putting safety devices to keep this from happening. You know, that's again why ozone generators are not necessarily putting ozone in your water where you're swimming. They're putting it in your piping where you are not. And then by the time the water gets out into the pool, that ozone's gone. It's killed bacteria, it's done its thing, and it's gone. So, you know, one thing I hear is, and this goes back and forth, does ozone hurt you? Yes. Is it going to hurt you using it with an ozone generator? No. Why? Because it's producing ozone in your piping, okay? And that seems to be something people are real scared of, that they're going to get an ozone generator and it's going to cause big harm. That's not how it works. I mean, they've designed these things to keep this from happening. So I really wanted to kind of hit this disadvantage with you, but then also give you kind of the real world concept of the generators. Another disadvantage is that it's really only treating the water that flows through the filter system. We talked about that because it's going through your filter system and it's killing the water in your filter system. So if you're not circulating your pool well and you have what we call dead spots where you got water stagnant kind of in the water that's not getting circulated, then that water's not getting any ozone in it. It's keeping its bacteria and not doing anything. This is part of the reason why you still got to keep chlorine in your water. Ozone generators work best with heavy pumps that can turn the pool's water at least 1.5 times a day. What I mean by that is a good thing to think about if you want to put an ozone generator in your pool is make sure you have a pump that's heavy enough to run all the water through that system 1.5 times a day through the filter system, which really in the above ground business and the pumps we're putting on them really shouldn't be that big of a deal. But you're going to get your maximum effectiveness out of an ozone generator when you have very proper circulation in your pool. You know, you really want to make sure you're getting good circulation because you're going to maximize your effectiveness of your ozone generator by having good circulation, having the right pump, and having your system set up properly so that you're getting the right circulation. Ozone generators do not completely prevent chlorine use. You still got to keep some chlorine in there. So this is basically what you're going to be doing as you're using and maintaining an ozone generator. Normal water balancing and testing should be maintained. Again, you're still going to be using chlorine on a week-to-week basis. You're just going to be using a whole lot less than somebody that's strictly using chlorine in your water. You still got to test your pH. You still got to test your balance chemicals. You know, you got to do that with all these systems. You still got to maintain normal water balance. Water should be shocked using chlorine after heavy usage or heavy rainfall. You know, you have a big, huge pool party. You have 3 days of thunderstorms. You're going to want to come out and shock your pool with chlorine to help get all that contamination out of your water real quick. Again, you still got to use some amount of chlorine in your pool. You're actually going to maintain a level of chlorine at about somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 parts per million. Now, a normal chlorine user is going from 3 to 5 parts per million. Somebody that's strictly using chlorine is going 3 to 5 parts per million. You get to lower yours down to 1. Again, you still got chlorine in the water, just a whole lot less. That's what these chlorine alternatives are for. Not ridding chlorine, but greatly reducing chlorine. An ozone module should be replaced every 4 to 5 seasons or as needed. You know, long story short, with an ozone generator, you hook this thing to your filter system, you let your pump run. When your pump's running, it's producing ozone, killing the bacteria, you're good to go. There isn't a whole lot more maintenance you need to do with the generator itself, aside of replacing every 4 to 5 years. This is what I think you need to know about an ozone generator. There's a lot of back and forth with these things. And again, you know, a lot of times you're only getting the opinion of people that do sell them or people that don't sell them. So I hope this has really helped you guys out. I hope this has kind of showed you what you need to know so that you can go out and make an intelligent decision on which chlorine alternative is going to work best for you. But let me say this here at closing. Whatever the case is, you know, it's the whole get-rich-quick scheme. There is no get-rich-quick scheme. You're still going to have to maintain your pool. You're still going to have to pay attention to it, but you're going to have a lot less chlorine than everybody else, okay? Eliminating those chloramines, which is really what we're trying to get rid of, okay? I hope this helped out for you guys. You have any questions, comments, please post it below the video. I'll be happy to answer them for you. And you need more details on how to maintain your pool, what you need to be doing, all your answers are going to be at easypoolacademy.com. Check us out. I'll see you guys there.